Hello, listeners. Today we are going to be talking about VBACs again. So we did a podcast on VBACs a couple of weeks ago, and Doula Michelle and Mo, who shared her story in that last VBAC, it was written and Sandy read it out. She couldn't make it to the last one, unfortunately. So Michelle and Mo felt that they needed to add some more, a different perspective, I guess, on VBACs. So we've decided to create this new podcast, just to follow up and expand a bit. And it's completely different, and I really hope that you enjoy it. Please don't forget to subscribe to Voice of the Voiceless, Speak Your Truth on Spreaker, or you can follow us on Facebook. I just really love to let your support known, comment, like, share, because, I'm doing this for free as a hobby because I love it, and everybody who speaks does it for free because they love it too. And this is just a really good platform to talk about these conversations on these topics that, often are hard to find information about, or it's hard to find people who will speak up on. If we can share this and get our voices heard, then we can just work together and bring to light these topics. So I hope you enjoy this podcast. Just keep in mind that I had to bring my daughter along, so there is a bit of her voice in the background, and I apologise. She tried to climb on me a few times, and it was very distracting for me. So I've told myself, promised myself that won't happen again. Thank you for being here today, Michelle and Mo. So you've got Michelle here, who's a doula, who's been in multiple podcasts with Voice of the Voiceless, and Mo, who's a mother who's experienced a really beautiful VBAC, and her story was actually shared in the last podcast that we had on VBACs. And the reason why we're doing another podcast on VBACs is because Mo and Michelle felt that they had something new to offer on VBACs, a different perspective, and we're not really sure yet what's going to come up. We have a vague plan, but we'll see how it goes. And to start with, Michelle wants to talk about caesarean section.
Yeah, thanks, Em. I was going through some old things that I wrote when I was doing my doula training a couple of years ago, and I thought it might be a good idea to start with going into the nitty-gritties of what a caesarean actually is, because I think many of us have heard of it, but unless you've experienced it yourself, you don't actually know all these, little details, and it's quite surprising when you hear how much is involved. Okay, so from what I can gather with caesarean birth today, it has become far too much of a trend for our medical industry. It's being turned to more frequently as a safer option for women to birth their babies. But since when has birth become such a dangerous experience? We always hear the death card being pulled out, that women and babies can die giving birth. And yes, I agree, it's possible, but it's also possible to die at any event in life. Death is a natural process that comes after birth for everyone. We are all born into a body, and we all die and leave the body. And I really don't agree, as death being used as a fear-mongering excuse to intervene with something so natural, such as childbirth. The caesarean rate has risen since fetal heart monitoring was introduced during a woman's labour. And we have the studies that show it is an outdated practice that does not and has never really improved the outcomes of birth. It does, however, send medical practitioners into a panic if a change of heart rate is detected, and this has raised our caesarean birth stats. Now, a caesarean birth is when an obstetrician surgically cuts a woman's abdomen and manually removes the baby and placenta. When a baby is born naturally via a vaginal birth, as its head squeezes through the birth canal, it activates triggers that drains the baby's lungs ready for its first breath. A caesarean-born baby skips this process and is likely to be whisked off to the resuscitation table and possibly need a tube down its throat to drain the fluid on the lungs. The surgery room is kept at a cool temperature because warmth will increase the risk of infection and bleeding. The mother will need to consume lots of drugs, which will be passed on to the baby, and traces will be found in breast milk. These drugs will inhibit the natural endorphins released during childbirth that aid in bonding, love, and joy. A mother will still love her baby after a caesarean birth, but this is because humans have a rational brain. If we purely ran on instincts, like our fellow mammals, such as sheep, studies have shown that if a sheep has an epidural during birth, it will have nothing to do with its baby. We also know if someone touches a newborn mammal, its mother could reject it. And we human mothers hold these same primal instincts. If we inhibit our birth hormones and have other people touching our baby and putting their scent on our baby at birth, it will hold ramifications. So there are two types of caesareans, and one is an elective caesarean, where the mother has agreed for a surgical birth and attends the hospital at an allocated time and day. And the second is an emergency C-section, where the mother may have started birth, it took a turn and is now ending in a caesarean. And most cases, it ends this way due to failed inductions. Failure to progress, in my eyes, is not true. Not true at all. It's been made up by the medical industry. Failure to progress actually means the birth is taking longer than the medical practitioners are comfortable with. And instead of looking at the emotional reasons why things have stalled, they tell the mother her body has failed and now she needs to be cut open. If you have agreed to an elective caesarean, you'll be awake during the procedure, and I'm pretty sure that today even all the emergency caesareans, the women are always awake. Were you awake, Mo?
Yeah, I can only speak from my experience, but yeah, I was awake during the caesarean, and I wanted to be awake and I wanted to be part of that process. I didn't want to have the emergency C-section anyway. So it was really important for me to be part of that process. I understood the bonding that needed to take place, and I understood, I actually understood what was going on in terms of the cascade of an intervention. While I was going through it, I actually knew this is what they talk about when they talk about a cascade of intervention. I felt powerless within it. I couldn't stop the cascade. It was just like a freight train by the time I got to that point of birthing. I didn't have an advocate, which was a lesson I really learnt from that experience, was just to have an advocate there to be able to be the strength that I couldn't be at that time. I was focused on birthing a baby. I wasn't focused on fighting off the interventions, but I felt like I was kind of worn down in the end, and I had no choice in it, really. So, but definitely I was awake, to answer the question. I was definitely awake, and I was glad that was the case.
You were like a general anaesthetic. So I
So
wasn't
they almost
really given
threaten
much
you.
of a choice. It was more like,
It almost feels like a threat to me, too.
it wasn't, I guess it wasn't really phrased like that,
Okay. Yeah.
but that was the message behind it.
Yeah.
And I didn't really, like, I would have preferred to have felt that pain and to stay awake than to, not have felt that pain and been put to sleep. But they didn't really give me that choice. It was just like, if the baby wasn't delivered soon, and if I didn't stop feeling that pain, then that's the choice they would have made for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
So with a caesarean, you are given a spinal anaesthetic, and it's injected in and around the nerves of the spinal column near the middle lower back, and this will numb you from waist down and works quite quickly. But as you just shared, it doesn't always work for everyone, and I've actually heard similar stories from other women.
Yep.
And while you're in the room having the surgery done, there is someone allocated in that room that will keep asking you questions. Can you feel this? Can you feel that? How's that feeling?
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't have that? Or
Oh, I did. I'm just surprised I didn't know that. I mean, I did have somebody stand next to me, but I was just so out of it. I didn't really know what was going on in that room at the time.
That person there is allocated to check that it's worked and that it doesn't wear off too quickly during the surgery as well. So, yeah, I at a later birth, I was actually in the room doulaing a woman who had a caesarean, and they probably 9 times out of 10 don't let the doulas in. But the person who's allocated there to speak to the mother to see how she's going and everything, I think and it was a man, by the way, which I didn't like either, but I think he felt that I'd taken over his role, and there was this real energy. Like, I was speaking to her, she'd done the Wise Hippo program, and I was doing the counting down with her and still trying to take her to a relaxing place, and he kept cutting in, like he wanted to take over what I was doing. So I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, no, I was just going to sort of say that I had that experience too, where there was actually the person that gave me the most comfort in that process was a man who was, and sort of a man who was an orderly, who sat me down and comforted me, and yet my midwife and everybody else was concerned about, obviously, and I can understand, the baby. However, there was nobody at all speaking to me about, So that was quite interesting that you say that. Yeah.
It's interesting.
That's how it works. The midwife's role in that room isn't to come up and comfort you and see how you're feeling. They have a man to do that. So maybe other women have experienced that it's actually been a woman in that place. But
I had a woman.
Oh, you did? Okay, well, there you go. So just before the surgery, you'll have an IV placed into your vein via your hand or lower arm. And this drip will deliver medications, fluids, and a blood transfusion if needed. Now, this IV drip is also becoming a routine practice for all women who arrive to birth their baby at a hospital as a precaution to save a step later if an emergency should arise. So what sort of seed are we planting by doing this to a perfectly healthy woman? To me, it's medical madness. You will be attached to a heart rate monitor, and a blood pressure cuff will be placed on your upper arm. You will be given an oxygen mask, and an oxygen monitoring device will be placed on your finger. A flexible tube called a Foley catheter will be inserted into your bladder to drain urine and keep your bladder empty during surgery. Your abdomen and pubic area will be washed with anaesthetic. So women have explained to me that even though you can't feel the pain of a caesarean, you can still feel all the sensations and everything that's happening. And I've heard a midwife try and explain that it's like someone washing dishes in your stomach.
Yeah.
Could you girls elaborate on that?
Yeah, I just can't. You brought up the experience again for me. Yeah, I was told it should just be pressure that I could feel, and I could feel so much more than that. I don't know what your experience was like, Mo.
So my experience was I couldn't feel anything. However, I was so focused on just my baby that it really, I wasn't really paying any attention to what they were doing. So I think I took myself away. I did the Wise Hippo program as well, and during that time I used that process of just counting down and taking myself where I needed to be to cope with it. So a lot of things like that, I took myself away for that period of time. I was really disappointed. I was really, really angry. Yeah, and I can feel that now coming up. So I was really disappointed about that I had to experience that. And that, so, yeah, I didn't feel anything that was going on really at that point.
Did you do some sort of hypnobirthing? Because is that where you learn that technique to count down and to calm yourself down?
Yeah, so I did the Wise Hippo program. I didn't have a doula with me, which I regret dearly. But I did do the Wise Hippo program, which I'm really grateful for, and that really helped with the whole process, the labour. It helped with being in the hospital and